I'd like to call this evening's study session to order. Thank you, everybody, for being here. For tonight, I will turn it over to Dr. Thomas for the purpose and agenda this evening.
Thank you, Chair Nelson, Board of Directors. Tonight's purpose for our study session is to cover more in depth some of the issues and topics that we as administration feel that are appropriate for the board to engage in. We have a series of items tonight, really digging into a lot of our policy work, and then any actions that would come from your study session this evening we would take into our regular business meeting. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chair Nelson, for the topics.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to briefly touch on our board working document, and then I have an announcement as well. Every study session, we keep in mind our assignments or roles as a school board, and we use this to keep us on track throughout the year and looking ahead 3 years to make sure that we are addressing what we need to do in our roles. This evening, we will be very specifically working on district policy and operational oversight with our audit report this evening. Before we jump into oversight of operations, number 4 in our first item, we do have one additional speaker this evening that was brought to my attention. And so with the board's permission, I will be asking Dr. Thomas we have the opportunity to get a brief update from one of our SROs this evening. Dr. Thomas,
Yeah.
you want to go ahead and
Sure.
call her up?
Yes, thank you, Chair Nelson and Board of Directors. And this was something that was going to be covered under my superintendent relations and going to move it up on the agenda if that's okay. If I could just set a little context. We know that in the state of Minnesota, we have passed laws that allow for the access to THC-based edibles, gummies, things of that nature. And it has been a point of significant conversation in many cities throughout the Twin Cities area. In our district, it's been a topic that all of our respective cities have actually passed resolutions to put a moratorium on the sales of such products. And I did advocate and speak to several of the mayors, but also advocated at a local school or city council meeting here in Prior Lake, taking a position on having spent some years in a legalized state, seeing firsthand the impacts of what happens in K-12 education, and really didn't want to rush into a situation where we as a school system were not prepared based upon a lot of, I would say, regulations that have yet to be put into place. With now the opening of this opportunity in the state. For the best interest of our kids and the protection of the interests of our students, that is part of my job as superintendent to advocate for their health and safety and well-being. And so I do appreciate all of our local city leaders and their respective councils to take a position to really study this law, as well as put any kind of systems of regulation in play that would align to help not entice youth down that path. I liken this to flavored vaping, and that became extremely problematic in K-12 education. And so through some conversations with our SRO, who's here from Savage Police Department, we've been having some conversations about what they're seeing from their vantage point as law enforcement, and trying to work in tandem with them to see how we can best prepare and mitigate any kind of incidences or increased incidences in our school campuses. And so tonight, we wanted to just share with the board some of our updates on those conversations that we're having, and specifically having some conversations about impacts at the high school, where we typically would, at that age range, have maybe some of that level of exposure, curiosity, et cetera. So with that, Dr. Edwards, is there anything else I need to share? Are we good to go? Well, I'll have Jackie, I'm sorry, Jackie, I don't know your last name. I call you by your last name, so if we can have you come forward.
Thank you. I'm Officer Kelch. I'm your school resource officer for all your schools in the city of Savage. Dr. Thomas asked me to put some numbers together. I put some rough numbers together. And before I get into real specifics, I mean, personally, just in my role, I have seen an increase. And my big thing is, what can we do about it? So not only for me, how can I be proactive and not always reactive, which is difficult, but also, how can I educate? So one of the things, so as Dr. Thomas mentioned, Colorado was one of the first states that legalized marijuana THC for recreational purposes. And what's happened is they actually have some of the best statistics and numbers and findings since it's been legalized there for the longest time. It makes me sad because I see the long-term effects through my role, not necessarily as a school resource officer, but as a police officer, of the continued use, long-term use of, that often does start off with marijuana use. Specifically, the difference is that 20, 30 years ago, when we would talk about marijuana as a drug and cannabis and THC, we were talking about THC levels that were 10, 20%. And all of the THC manufactured products are looking at 90 to 99% of a THC level. So that's a big difference. And with that being said, one of the big dangers that I want to say 2 years ago, they started finding out of Colorado is use of this high potency THC in adolescents is now being linked to cases of schizophrenia and psychosis. So looking at the World Health Organization and some numbers to come out of there, between 8 and 13% of all schizophrenia cases are being linked to marijuana and cannabis use in teenage years. And the risk of schizophrenia jumps by 300% among regular cannabis users. So those are some pretty scary numbers. Some things that I can't measure, but I can talk about, are conversations in a mentoring setting that I have with students. I don't necessarily have a crime to charge them with, so it wouldn't be something that I keep track of numbers for. But when I ask, and I enjoy having these conversations because I really want to educate kids that this isn't just something that's a casual smoking weed. There are some serious long-term effects here that they don't realize. But I ask them, would you ever smoke meth, meaning methamphetamine? And they all, every kid I've ever asked that has gave me a no, of course not. Well, do you realize that the THC is having the same long-term effects on you that that methamphetamine does? So I'm concerned. Some local statistics for you, and this is just drug cases involving teens or anybody over the, I should say anybody under the age of 18. For the last 3 years, in Savage, we had a total of 26. In Shakopee, a total of 41. In Burnsville, a total of 24. In Scott County, a total of 20. In the first 6 weeks of school, I have 4 open cases right now, just at the high school. So I asked myself, how can I be proactive, and how can I educate? So part of my education plan, as part of your school resource officer, I do try to hold a public education forum. Last year I did it on social media and the mental effects on adolescents. This year I'm planning on doing that this spring on drugs. And to go a lot more into depth into all of the effects and use to educate not only parents, things to look for, but also for students about the possible potential dangers of that. The other thing that I want to do proactively is to utilize our canine to come in and to search. And what that would look at, like from our standpoint of view, I've been working on this for a long time. I've gone through the student handbook. The student handbook does prevent me from doing any randomized searching inside the school. But the handbook does allow me to do outside of the school to vehicles, for student vehicles that are parked on the property. So what that would look like is I would have 3 canines present, and we would randomly search, doing outside sniffs of vehicles, and then handle accordingly, depending on if we find things or not. I don't expect to find an astonishing number, but I think, again, not only in proactivity, but our presence there and conducting these type of searches is actually preventative in its own way too. When we choose this date to do this, it won't be a secretive thing. We're not hiding in the parking lot. But I think it's important, because not only am I a police officer, but I'm a mother of students here in the district. And I know I wear a little bit of a different hat with my police officer role, but as a parent, I want to feel like the fact that my school would be doing something proactive to kind of curb this, I would feel much better as a parent, and to know that they care, and that there's a little added level of security and safety to the health of my children who are at school. So that would be our plan. We would do basically a lockdown of just the exterior doors on the day that this would happen. And that is just to prevent anybody that might see us out there from running out to their car and leaving. And if a student needed to go out and get something, I'm fine with them being escorted by staff or something like that. It wouldn't be an all-day ordeal. It would probably be, I would say, an hour or 2 at the most.
So I'll just share, thank you for that update, and I wanted to bring this forward to the board for situational awareness. It won't be anything that you would vote on necessarily as a board, but just more around the safety and security and some of the measures that we are taking through administration to ensuring that we have safe campuses, given some of the community dynamics that we've been engaged with our local law enforcement around our cities. And, I've been involved with canine sweeps for years. It's been regular protocol for many districts that I've been engaged in, particularly at the secondary level. And so we would coordinate with the high school with protocol, notifications, all those systems and procedures would be in place should there be any kind of drug sniffs that, have a positive identification, et cetera. But just know that this is something that, as an administrative team, we felt that we could support. As well as really partner with our local law enforcement to ensure that we have safe campuses. And so just wanted to provide that as one of my updates here tonight for the board. And Chair Nelson, I turn it back to you for any questions of the board.
Any questions at this point or comments?
I have one comment. I think it all makes sense, and I really think it's a good approach. And I'm hearing you talk about preventative work, which is so important in education, and talking about punitive, right, which is absolutely necessary. I think like with our vaping crisis, because I believe it to be a crisis, a lot of our work has very publicly facing been that way. As a district, I don't want us to forget about the restorative work of when kids become addicted, how do we help them instead of just punish. They're addicted now. They know the punishment. They don't want to be vaping. They may not want to be wanting to be just smoking, but how do we help them come out of that? And not that that's on the district's shoulders, because it's much more broad than that, but that I think there's a lot of shame with addiction, so making sure we create an environment where it's really restorative. Anyway, to think about that piece of the work too.
Can I respond, or I don't
Yeah.
know what
Yeah.
the normal?
Yes.
So one thing I would like to mention is, so anything over 0.25 grams of marijuana oil is a felony. That sounds really scary, but, and it should be, it's a serious matter. I will say, though, as far as restorative things goes, we work closely with the Scott County Attorney's Office, and for first-time offenders and for juveniles especially, so they're never looking at just punitive. They're not looking at any kind of jail time or incarceration or anything like that. They're more than likely enrolled in what's called a diversion program, where they receive counseling, rehabilitation, and education and things like those. So we're aware of that too. And the great thing about juveniles is they have such a high percentage of turning their lives around to change that direction. Statistically, after they turn 18, they have an 85% chance of recidivism, of, repeating the same crimes, et cetera. So it's another, for me, another added reason why I love working with kids so much, because they are still moldable and changeable and you're able to help them.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Stacey.
Just a question on, I know Savage is the high school, but just with, how the THC now is in food products and, I know gummies and things like that. I'm just curious if we're collaborating all with the middle schools. I mean, I know kids that are vaping at the middle school at some point too as well. I'm assuming, just the delivery model of the THC now, that it seems like it's a food type ingredient, so it's so much harder, I think, in some ways to catch, maybe not, but I'm just wondering if there's collaboration with Prior Lake in the sense of trying to get the middle school kids. I think there's possibly issues there too.
Director Ruel, yes, there will be. We're starting here with our high school, and then, to your point, accessibility is something that I think is what scares me most. And maybe not even intentional, because we're even seeing some of the more illicit street drugs being disguised as M&Ms and things of that nature now, where a kid might just take a handful of M&Ms thinking that's what it is. So these are very serious conversations, and I think also to Vice Chair Nelson's point, how can we as a school system bring that health education component to our preventative approach? This is one aspect of many that we're engaged in, but definitely at the middle school level it would be our next tier in terms of partnering with Prior Lake PD as well.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Mary?
I just want to say thank you. I have personal experience with the Anoka Hennepin Drug Task Force and other areas in this space. And been to Denver, been to San Francisco, seen the stats. I appreciate the proactivity. I appreciate the education. I don't think most kids think or even know the word addiction, to tell you the truth. And I'm not suggesting that somebody who goes out and does this even recreationally thinks they're addicted, or, there's a lot of issues with the term, but I do know that it's been an increasing problem. Saw the firsthand effect at our concert over the summer, and I just hope that you come back here with any additional requests, and can't speak for the board, but I know you would have my full support.
Other comments or questions?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So I'm curious what communication might look like in advance of doing one of these canine sniffs, just to make sure that community's aware or parents are aware of what's going to come forward. So if and when one of their children turns up in one of their vehicles that, oh, this happened, that they have an idea of what's happening and have the full story.
Thank you for that question, and we are actually working with building administration right now, developing said communications. One for an announcement, as you heard tonight, that we would identify, the window of time that we believe we would conduct that search, but then also have that support communication in place so that should a positive identification come up, we have a protocol that administration can be supported with and follow to ensure that student gets the support that they need in terms of what that looks like. We would also do an after-action communication to let the families and community know we've completed that search, and that we're in that lockdown mode for the past hour and a half today. So if your student comes home and talking about this, the families know what we're doing, that this is by design and things of that nature. So we are putting all that communication in place.
Right, great, thank you.
Jonathan?
I was going to say, this has been a topic that has been discussed at scale between all the different communities and different government entities trying to figure out how to prepare and plan, and most of the communities are trying to pass a one-year moratorium to figure out zoning and all the other stuff, so I think it's good that we are addressing it. I don't want it to go without saying, I'm assuming we have consulted with our legal to make sure we're doing this all correctly. I support it. I just want to make sure we're not dealing afterwards with claims of any sort of illegal search or anything like that.
Correct. Director Drews and Board, yes, that is something that we've vetted and will ensure that whatever our protocols and processes land on in terms of their final decisions, that's been pre-approved and vetted with our legal counsel in conjunction with law enforcement.
Perfect.
And I can assure you too, I have been in contact with the Scott County Attorney's Office, in specific, the juvenile prosecutor that I work with as well.
All right, anybody else? I'll just add my thanks for wearing both the hats you wear as a parent and as an officer. I think that gives an extra level of depth, and I appreciate your insights from that point of view. And I will say I have heard this topic come up at some of Dr. Thomas's listening sessions in the community as well, and they wanted to know, what are you doing and how are you helping? So your report's very helpful. Thank you for making time to be here tonight.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, all set.
Yep.
You are good to go. Thank you. All right, next we'll be moving on to oversight of operations, and first up is our final 2021-22 audit report. Dr. Thomas, you want to kick this off?
Yes, thank you, Chair Nelson, Board of Directors. This evening, you will hear an overview of our audit report, and I will say this is my first interaction with our auditors here. I mean, they're a very well-known firm locally, but my first time interacting in this capacity. And I will say that I was pretty impressed to know that we're going to get this audit done. This is probably the fastest audit I've ever been through. But very good, very thorough, and I really appreciate the support of the firm. I will turn it over to Ms. Fredrickson to add additional context for this evening's presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas, Chair Nelson, Board. We have Jim Eichten here from MMKR, who is our audit firm. He has some slides he'll run through with you, and then we will entertain any questions, and then just kind of give you an update as we move forward. So, Jim?
And thank you again for your allowing us to have the officer speak. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thanks, Tammy. Thanks, Superintendent, members of the board. My name is Jim Eichten with MMKR CPAs, here this evening to give a presentation on the audit results for the year ended June 30th, 2022. I do have a PowerPoint. I understand that my management letter was also distributed. I also see some handouts that were new off the presses just last week. Just for context purposes, the audit is complete. We completed the process and issued opinions and final reports probably middle of last week, I guess you can say. So it is a requirement, first of all, provide some context. It is a requirement that the district prepare an annual financial statement. That annual financial statement looks a little bit like this. It's about 118 pages long, I think is what it is. It is an annual comprehensive financial report, which actually goes above and beyond the required element for your financial statement. The district does submit this document for Certificate of Achievement in Financial Reporting on an annual basis, and you've received the certificate for the past several years. As part of the audit process, we follow audit standards that are guided by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. Those standards require us to test your internal controls specifically related to financial reporting. We are required to test your compliance with laws and regulations that relate again to financial reporting. We're also required to audit your compliance with state laws and regulations. That particular audit standard is guided by the Office of the State Auditor in the state of Minnesota. They gave us a list of the laws that we test. We don't test every law, we only those on their list. Then lastly, we issue what's called the Single Audit of Federal Awards. That particular standard is three-pronged. We issue an opinion on the schedule of awards, the dollars that you received, the internal control specifically related to those expenditures, and then the compliance requirements as it relates to what is defined as major programs, which is really a rule-based process. So as part of our process, we also issue what's called the management report, and the management report is what was distributed, I think, in the packets, and it's now in official form this evening. And I'm going to be going through that particular document and going through some of the bullet points that we wanted to touch on in this particular meeting. I did want to address first and foremost, and it's not really on the slides, some of the context of this particular audit. My firm audits about 50 school districts, schools every fall and season, and Superintendent referenced this. We are at about 3 at this particular moment. So if that gives you any sort of context as to where we are as a firm and where you land in terms of getting this process done, you're well ahead of the curve in that regard. And that's a positive statement, of course. There's a lot to these audits, and you'll see some of that as I talk through this particular presentation. This particular year was even more onerous given some of the standards change that I'll reference, but also some of the additional federal awards you're getting. If those of you that are familiar with my presentation, I wasn't here until December, I think, last year, maybe January, to present on the schedule of federal awards. And here we are in October issuing opinions on that. So that really bodes well in terms of just the work that's being done at the business office to work through this audit process. So continuing on in that regard, first and foremost, I did issue what's called a clean opinion on that comprehensive annual financial statement. It is defined as an unmodified opinion. Unmodified was actually the opinion we're looking for. Better probably described as a clean opinion, as I said. There is a bullet point in that particular opinion that's best described as an emphasis of a matter. And the matter is that we issued a new standard. There was governmental accounting standards changed the way we report leases, and the reporting of the leases has changed dramatically, and it changed a significant number of pages in the financial report. It changed a lot of the coding that's done internally to account for that. And because of the breadth and the depth of change, it is required to be emphasized in the opinion. Did that change the opinion? No, it really didn't, but it is emphasized, and it is noteworthy as part of this process. As you can see on the bullet point, we didn't have any findings on the internal controls or the compliance report or the compliance with Minnesota laws and regulations, as you can see on this particular finding page, as noted. Continuing on, in the single audit of federal awards, I just want to give some sort of context before I move on the single audit of federal awards. The district received and reported about $9 million of expenditures in federal awards this past year. That particular number is most noted, in my opinion, by the amount of dollars that you received that were different than they were in the past. The amount of federal dollars and new dollars and different types of dollars that are coming from the federal government has changed dramatically due to the pandemic. So I just added it up before I was presenting for this. About $6.5 million of that $9 million is dollars that are coming to you that are new. Maybe not new totally, but new restrictions, new regulations, new guidelines, different flow of different processes that are coming with those dollars. And all of that comes with me auditing some different regulations and asking different questions and really developing new standards. So there's a lot to the schedule of federal awards this year, and it is something that you should be aware of. So having a clean opinion on the schedule of federal awards wasn't an easy task, and certainly is noteworthy. So I mentioned the internal controls and the compliance findings. So we did have what looks like 2 findings up on the board there. Actually, if you look at the reports, it's 1 finding with 2 aspects to it. This particular finding relates to the district's receipt of what's defined as emergency connectivity funds. Really, federal dollars were provided to districts to buy information or IT equipment in this case. So the particular program that we have a finding relates to that emergency connectivity funds. And during our testing, we noted 2 things. The first one relates to the resale of those particular products. And the federal government provided IT equipment to you, and it came along with a restriction that you were not able to resell those within a 3-year period. You were required to keep those. And due to the need of that particular equipment, they were resold. And in that case, that wasn't allowed under federal standard to be done as part of this process. And so that's really just a qualitative item that you weren't allowed to do that, and that occurred. The second finding, as you can see, and maybe the second aspect of one finding, better said, is it relates to that these dollars to find these equipment, these devices that you received, were to be used for remote learning. And there's a very stringent rules around how to document that you had met the need or that need, and how you were to go about documenting that need for these connectivity dollars to be used in remote learning. And that documentation, that testing on our end, ultimately it came up with a finding that, yep, there wasn't the documentation to support the need that the federal government would say you should have. And so you'll see a finding in there regarding that. There is a question costs, if you will, which is a terminology used in federal standard that calculated out that unmet need, if you will, about $26,000 in total of that particular grant was the relationship of the calculations that showed that you didn't have those support to show that need. So I want to kind of go back to this finding and really kind of talk about it from this standpoint. Audits come with findings. If you listened to me at all last year and maybe the year before, an audit is a learning experience. We're here to audit, but we're also here to learn and to comply. And so because of that, we have findings. It happens pretty common, actually. It's rare that I go to a school board meeting and say, oh, you didn't have any findings. What should be the most important focus about any finding, and I'll talk about the ones from last year in a little bit, is, well, what's the next step? What's the corrective action plan? And you'll see in the documents that the district has, in conjunction with me, developed a written corrective action plan. I've heard from several representatives of the district, including the superintendent and other members, the IT department, asking questions about this. Oh, how are we going to correct that? What should we do from here? How are we going to correct this so it doesn't happen in the future? That's the most important element to me, which is, hey, you understand that what happened? Let's not do that again. How do we correct it? And I hopefully intend or expect that this finding will happen again next year, which is part of the process, is part of the corrective action plan. So I'm going to stop right there. I know I said a lot about that. Does anybody have any questions specifically related to that particular finding? If not, I'll continue on. So it is in my document, I referenced this. We are required to follow up on prior audit findings. There were 3 findings last year in the audit process, one related to cash management, one related to the late payment of bills, and one related to a filing requirement related to the OPEB plan. We are required as part of an audit to actually take our testing above and beyond that we normally would do with these findings, and we noted no findings again, or this year related to each of those areas, which from a board's perspective is the exact result you would hope for in that regard. So I'm going to move forward to the second part of any audit relates to the financial results. And every audit that I work with has 2 components, the compliance perspective, which I just touched on. The second part is the financial results. And the next several graphs talk about that a little bit. We like to start out with some benchmarking, just some trend lines as we talk about this. This particular graph you see on the board is on page 6 of my report, but it really shows what we use very commonly and boards use commonly, which is fund balances as a percentage of operations. This particular percentage is actually the state of Minnesota's calculation. It is not the district's calculation, but this is the statewide calculation. Why I put this up here is really shows something that's counterintuitive to me. The yellow graph is actually showing that statewide fund balances in every school district around the state are actually growing. Much of that has to do with the impact of the pandemic. There was less spending happening at the various school levels just because of a variety of reasons, closures or just distance learning and the variety of things. But other operations were suspended, if you will. So there were some dollars that are set aside and provided to districts that this operation you weren't spending. And so there is an increase overall in fund balances. If you look at the state, there's a fund balance percentage that was very flat for, I mean, you could barely see the change for about a half decade. And now we're seeing an increase, which is really an impact of the pandemic. The blue graph is your particular percentage. You can see a very stable environment in fund balance, really stable. I mean, that blue graph, again, changes. To me, that's the highlight of that particular graph, is you don't see that stability in general when it comes to districts. You tend to see some ups and downs based on everyday management. To see that you're managing your fund balance, your equity position that well, and that consistently over time is really notable to me. So in this particular presentation, we also show a graphical presentation. This one is on revenues on a per-student basis. So the district in 2022 had about $16,123 per resident, per student. That compares to a metro area average of about $18,000 per student. Well, that's noteworthy because of one thing. That's significantly less than the average metro area school or district. You are working on an environment that is getting less dollars than a metro area district. I'm not here to opine on that, I'm just here to point it out. It is something that everybody should be aware of. You can see in 2022, you did have some increasing revenues per student, mostly in state aid. There were, the formula for state special education aid was beneficial to the district this past year, so you received additional dollars in that category. And in the food service and community service programs, those programs grew mainly because the pandemic wasn't happening any longer, and those programming started to continue and grow. We also then provide the other side of the equation here, which is the expenditures on a per-student basis. The district spends $15,300 per student in 2022, and as you would hope or expect, that dollar amount is less than a comparable district. You're not getting the revenues, so you would hope that the expenditures are less as well. Really the counter impact of that revenue equation. Some other items that are noteworthy there when I look at that particular presentation is in the area of capital. There were some significant capital dollars due to some of the ongoing referendum costs that really pretty much fell off during 2022, which was expected. So you're seeing that particular element, but also you're seeing some additional dollars in the classroom. You can see regular instruction went up to $5,743 per resident. Again, really dollars going towards instruction, salaries and benefits and teachers and the like. This graph shows the general fund financial position, really the main fund of the district. The general fund financial position at the end of June 30th, 2022 was total of unrestricted fund balance of $18.6 million. There was an increase in overall fund balance this past year of roughly $5.8 million. Most of that particular increase was a combination of things. Revenues were higher than projected, higher than expected, but costs were actually significantly lower than what was expected as well. What that means at the end of the year, you're seeing that your general fund financial position ended the year with a total fund balance of $22 million. That particular fund balance is broken down by rule to areas called non-spendable items that really are, you can't spend. Those that are restricted by law or rule, and I'll kind of show you some of those in a little bit. You also have dollars that are assigned, which are dollars that you personally, as a district, set aside for a particular requirement or a particular internal obligation, and those are really our internal obligation and set-asides. So I did mention this, I believe, but the district does have a fund balance policy. There is a policy that states that you will strive to maintain a total unassigned and assigned, add them together, general fund balance of 8 to 12% of expenditures. So at the end of the year, if you look at that, not the bottom line, it's the one second to last, at the end of the year, you're at 17.3. And so you are, above that particular range that you have in policy, but it isn't that much different than what you look at on the graph for the last 5 years. You've been, or 4 years in this case, you're anywhere between 13 to 14, 15%. So you're really very stable, and really that policy that you have really guides you to look at that and say, yeah, we're above the policy range, but that's probably a good place to be, overall. It was pointed out, and I think the superintendent and Tammy talked about this a little bit, when you look at that particular fund balance, there are a lot of categories, and this isn't in the management report, this is actually right out of the comprehensive annual financial report. But it does show a lot of the categories, and you have to be careful when you look at those fund balances to make sure you're using the right percentages, if you will. The fund balance policy does include the unassigned and assigned, but remember that assigned amount is assigned. It is set aside for something. So some of those dollars, even though you're above that policy, have been set aside by your district. So something to pay attention to when you're looking at that fund balance and knowing what the categories are. You have significant dollars if set aside for capital, staff development, long-term facilities maintenance. Those types of things are restricted and are part of the restricted balance, but also something that you'll eventually need to spend it on. They're required to be set aside. So something to be aware of as we look at the fund balance. We do provide a lot of information in the presentation as well. I'm not going to get too deep into any of these graphs. This one stands out. This is general fund revenue showing budget to actual compared to last year. I mentioned the state sources. You can see state sources were $87.4 million compared to a budget of $85.8. All of that was in special ed, state special education aid. Those formulas were beneficial to you this past year. On the expense side, you can see here showing graphical presentations of some of the categories, salaries and benefits. Obviously, salaries and benefits are a large percent of your budget. Overall expenditures were less than budget by about $5 million, and that's a significant dollar amount when you think about it. But it's very consistent with a lot of the audits that we're working on this year. There's a ton of unfilled positions, as you might understand, in local government. It's hard to find people to do that. Did you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify, in the initial state calculated fund balance, you had a 19 point something percent.
Yeah.
And then in the actual fund balance, you had a 17.3% overall. Why is there a difference there?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first graphical presentation is the statewide calculation, and that particular percentage is guided by the state's statutes. It's guided by the statutory requirements that the state has for us. If anybody's studied statutory operating debt, that terminology, that's the calculation we're using in that first graph.
Okay.
In the secondary graphs, we're using the district's calculation. Yeah, so it's a great question. It gets asked a lot. Great question.
I do have a question, Tammy, just to clarify, even though it looks like we've got a 17.3%, he did mention the unfilled positions. If we had filled those positions, do you have, and I know I didn't ask this ahead of time, so I apologize for the surprise question, but I just want to clarify, if we get lucky and we do fill those positions this year, what will that bring our fund balance down to? Do you have any idea?
I'd have to calculate it, but I mean, if just thinking that we have 72 vacant positions, I mean, we're talking a range of $5 to $7 million maybe with the fringe benefits on there. I mean, I could do the I'd have to look at each of the positions to see which ones are vacant, but, I mean, it's going to be a significant amount.
Okay.
You know.
That makes sense from the increase in the 5 million just mentioned and the lack of filled positions.
Right.
That equates.
Yep.
Okay.
So on the expenditure side, there are other categories other than the unfilled position, some of the professional development categories, another category where it's significantly lower just because we had a pandemic and you maybe you thought you were going to do more professional development, it just didn't happen. So you have many things like that, you know, that are really coming into that expenditure side that, you know, that will change, that are ever changing, if you will. So I'll continue on, and then I'll go back to questions as well. So we do have other funds of the district that we want to talk about. You can see here, these are two of the other main funds, the Food Service Fund as well as the Community Service Fund. Both of these funds saw increases in their overall fund balance this past year. The Food Service Fund increasing by almost 1.1 million. The Community Ed Fund, Community Service Fund increasing almost $1 million. Both of these funds have operational percentages that are very stable in terms of overall operations, as you can see in the graph. And the last fund I really want to talk about is this self-insurance fund. The district does self-insure for medical and dental insurance, and this past year was a positive year. You had an overall increase of about $700,000. The reason I bring that up is we're experiencing in a lot of our audits where that isn't the case, and most notably due to the changing environment due to the pandemic. There were a lot of times people weren't going to doctors, and as the pandemic ended and people went to doctors, that self-insured fund is seeing a lot of claims. And so it's something to be very careful of when you look at and evaluate that self-insured plan. So that's the end of my presentation. It will open it up for question, but I did want to summarize the district did issue, and we did issue a clean opinion on the basic financial statements. One emphasis of a matter on the least standard that was ever changing. The district's annual comprehensive financial report was and will be issued for certificate of achievement. I discussed the one finding reported that had two aspects to it. And we talked just a little bit ago about the increasing fund balances and all of the individual funds as well as the self-insured fund. And then overall, I just wanted to commend the district on its thorough and timely audit process. I was spending some time before I got here today and talked to one of the staff members who was out here and said there wasn't a 24-hour period ever went by that they didn't respond to my emails throughout the process, which isn't always the case when it comes to these audits. They're challenging and thorough, so to be so timely and thorough on the process is commendable. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions that you might have for me on the audit.
Take questions?
Few observations and some questions at the same time. I'll start by just saying to Tammy and her staff, thank you for all of the work and all of the effort. I feel like your department kind of gets taken for granted, and when we have an audit and we hear all the good work that's been done, I feel like you guys deserve a victory lap. So pat on the back for all of you for making us look good. To Mary's point, I think we have good news here, and we also have to be cautious in how we receive it and how we think about planning going forward, because we had $5 million budgeted that was not spent. So needless to say, that's going to add to our fund balance, and I'd really like it. I think everybody in this room would really like it if next year we fill all those positions and we can spend that money, because we need those paras. We need all those folks and the child nutrition services folks that we haven't been able to get. So I think we have to remain vigilant and cautious as we look ahead and think about where that fund balance is going. I'm curious, Jim, you talked about the difference in revenues from an average district. Obviously, you know, there's some element of what is your demographic makeup of your students that affects that and so on. Can you speak a little bit to how much of that is made from that? I'm noticing on the report that our local revenue from our taxpayers is about 39% less than the average in the metro area. That was my math this afternoon. So I wonder if you can speak to where that difference of revenue comes from a little bit.
Yeah, when you look at this particular graph, probably one of the most key elements of that graph is the property taxes and the state aid are very much tied together. There are certain aspects of the formulas, and they're complex formulas for sure, but there are certainly elements that go back and forth based on formula. So when I look at that particular graph, I look at it together. It's the taxes and the state aids together. But ultimately, those formulas are the same, if you will, from district to district to district. What is not, however, is referendum dollars. There's a large percentage of that aid to districts is in the form of referendum dollars, which is typically voter approved. And not always, but it typically is. And so that's the part that you may want to, I'm sure there's data readily available if asked, to get you that type of aspect. Where do you stand when it comes to referendum compared to other districts? And that would probably be the one that stand out to me.
My one other thing I wanted to quickly call out is the first line on the expenditures on the next slide.
Yeah.
Administration, thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, the first two lines are administration and district support services. So both of those would be self-described as administrative functions if you look at the criteria that goes into those lines. And so you look at that particular line and you're spending about $871 per student when your comparable district is spending over $1,000. To me, that says high efficiency at the administrative level. It also says you probably have less people than your comparable district. Those are the conclusions. Is it right or wrong? I'm not here to judge. I'm here to give the data.
Sure.
For sure, but that is definitely noteworthy. You really picked that out nicely.
Thank you.
Other questions? Julie, please.
I wanted to reiterate what Jonathan said to the business office. I think that listening to you for 2 years in a row, I continue to hear a message that says that our business office does a really good job answering your questions and getting you what you need. So I appreciate that. For me, the only thing that I would ask is I read in the report, it says salaries and benefits were under budget by 1.9 million, almost 1.9 million, and that we had increased our salaries and benefits by almost 2 million. I want us to be careful tonight. I've heard like maybe unfilled positions is 5 million. I think we should really focus on what that number really looks like. If it's some money from the year before carrying over into that bucket, what that bucket looks like. And then at some point, spending some time thinking about when an unfilled position will never be filled and what it looks like to operate this organization. And it's the new normal for a lot of corporations, and it's probably a new normal for us. And then when I look at that line that Jonathan pointed out about administration and district support, that's our support staff, that's our secretaries and all that, correct, in that bucket. Just are we having less people do more work? And I know there's mandates and there's ways that dollars are assigned, but what is our flexibility and freedom to start paying attention to how much money gets in that bucket? And I don't want to put you on the spot tonight either. I would rather have you come back and say, boy, looking at the last couple years, this is truly where our unfilled dollars have brought us to be, because I'd like to see that. That's it.
Stacy. Was there more, Julie?
Oh, sorry.
Nope, that's it.
She said that. I would just reiterate what Julie said. I think that's an excellent point. Is finding out what the new normal is. And then the other point, and I think she kind of said it too, is, I just reiterate, the work is still getting done. The load is heavy. You can pay people as much as you can pay people. I'm not saying that, but it's also about the bodies. And so I think making our positions attractive in this environment is going to take more money. So, and I think that's something that whether it's less people and we pay them more, or more people and whatever that formula is, we need to make sure that we're getting our, how many of our positions that you just said are unfulfilled, at least starting to whittle down that number, because it's not sustainable. So, well, it's great news in the financial world. I think from a workload standpoint, it causes me to really pause about, you know, and I know our employees are working their butts off, but this is getting to be a lot, so.
I have a question for Tammy. I think it's more for Tammy because of the environment. And then another, just want to point out, I know it says administration is low, but special education, instructional support, and pupil support services are also less, as well as down the line, for, that directly impacts our students and our staff. I don't know if that's a reflection of our lower staff in that area, but that's not okay. It's one thing to be lean, it's another thing to cut our students and staffing short as far as our direct educational staff, so that's also an impact. My question for Tammy, and first of all, I didn't know if you had any comments on that, is that, because it seems like it's almost, when you look at the pattern and percentage decrease, it goes all the way down, it's not just in one area.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly pervasive when I look at the graphs. I'm sure there's, the one area there you can note that's probably above is in the debt service area, which is mostly related to development and some of the recent development. But otherwise, it's pretty pervasive across the board, so.
You know, when I saw the pension liability and net of deferments as a positive 2.6 million, I guess percentage-wise, I thought we were on the high end of having retirees and things like that, especially due to COVID. I'm a little concerned about our pension liability and if we expect that to stay, because we decreased by the 2.6 million between 2021 and 2022 in the report. What are there any predictions? Do we think that's going to be higher again next year or anything as we age out of some of our educators?
Tam, you want me to grab that one? So you're looking at page 16, I believe, of the management report. It's a line that calls pension liabilities net of deferments. So to fully understand that particular line item, governmental accounting standards requires you to report your percentage of the statewide pension obligations.
Correct.
And so this is PERA and TRA is what I'm referring to. So because of formulas at the state level, which are actually a year old
Okay.
when we do this, so
It's not
if you go
reflective.
back to 2020, well, 2021, the market did really well in 2021. So this improved because of the market at the statewide level.
You're not talking about current in the bond.
Yeah,
and
so
all
next
the
year, this
pension
is gonna go
funds.
the other way, because the market kind of
That's-
went
yeah.
the other way. So most likely, you're gonna get this gain that you see here flip on you the next year.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Right. That's a good question. You get that all the time. So the one clear, I think I wanted to be clear about what your question was. The impact on the district is minimal, if none,
It's
because you're gonna have to
state.
you're gonna have to pay into them no matter what their pension obligation is. They may raise the rate because of their, either funded or not funded, but typically you're gonna pay in, and it really has less to do with, it has less to do with the actual actions here at the district and more to do with the market. So I hope that I helped with that question.
It did,
Yeah.
but when I look at the state legislative sessions and a lot of time they talk about the solvency and the direction that it's going and the impact and the extra funding that's going to occur and the burden that's going to be delivered for the districts. And when I see that, what you said about the markets, I didn't think about that, but
Yeah.
you're right. Particularly the bond market was very, very good. We had an inversion for a couple years. But I don't think that's going to occur. Is that going to hurt us next year from a district perspective, or do you think it's going to take some time to actually reflect back?
It'll take some time, because right now the legislature would have to actually approve an increase to that pension, which would take, they approve something, it usually takes another year even to get it to hit your impact. So it'll take a little bit, it'd be a couple years out for sure before you'd even see any impact, if it were to occur.
Okay.
Yep.
If I can just add, we have our internal services fund, we have an OPEB trust in there that currently is funded adequately to meet the immediate needs of our retirees. But if you look at the long-term liability, we are underfunded, which we have an opportunity to every year add some more to that internal services OPEB trust fund to meet that long-term liability. But again, it's not something we have to do immediately. We're going to have to plan for long-term. And if I can also just kind of add, as we think about, I mean, this has been obviously a very good audit for us, and we've increased our fund balance more than we thought. But I want to just remind us that we also have some needs that we haven't addressed yet, such as our math and science curriculum adoption. We're coming up, we're going to have to think about that. We didn't really fully fund the trades pathway at MinCaps this year, so we need to look at investing some there. Our finance HR system, Skyward, has told us that eventually we're going to have to go to their new cumulative version, which we are not prepared to do yet, so that's going to take some investment there. We have several positions that a couple years ago we moved to COVID funding because we had the dollars to do that. This is our last year of COVID money, so there are several positions that we're going to have to move back to the general fund. So we're just going to have to be aware of making sure that we're funding those, as well as some non-salary dollars that we put on ESSER that we're going to have to address. I know there are some safety issues at school, such as earphones at all of our loading docks. There's cameras that we need at some of the sites. I've heard that we need a new generator at the high school, as well as a new tractor for operations. We're going to anticipate in the near future some utilities increases, which I think we're already seeing some, if you've seen any of your utility bills in the last couple months. And we don't know what inflation's going to look like. So while this is great news that we were able to add to fund balance, I just want us to be cautious of the things that we do are going to need to address in the short-term future.
Could I ask you a question about the generator really quick? We're leasing our generators right now, correct?
That, I believe, is, I don't know, is Jim here?
Jim, could you,
Oh, Jim's here.
thank you, Jim.
And I'm sorry for jumping around, yeah.
So, good evening. What we're talking about, Mary, is the high school generator.
Right.
It came with the building. I don't think we're paying a lease on that one. We are, however, at the Red Tail and Jeffers.
Okay.
Lease to own. Lease to own, okay? Thank you.
Tammy, I know that we've talked a lot about the ESSER funds over the last couple years and before you got here. Could you drill down into a little bit about your comment about the ESSER funds there and what we need to be aware of?
So I think what this district did, as did many, many other districts, I know Minneapolis did the same thing. When we got the COVID dollars, there were very specific list of things that could be funded out of those COVID dollars that made sense to move some of those positions onto there, that because they were doing the work that's defined in the COVID money. So it makes perfect sense. What happened is, as you have declining enrollment, as you have, no increase in the formula allowance, you're getting less revenue. So now, all those districts that put positions on the COVID money that you have to now take off are stretched much more thin on the general fund. So as we move the positions back to the general fund, we may have to make some different choices of what not to fund anymore as we move forward. Again, we'll just have to kind of hope that the legislature does a little better job this year, gives us some additional formula allowance money and frees up some of that $7 billion they have over there that hopefully that we can use for needs at the school districts.
Thank you, and thank you for that comprehensive explanation.
Chair Nelson, if I may, so just to echo several things that were shared from the board directors this evening, and again, compliments to Tammy and all the staff. I think for the past several meetings, we've been talking about taking a very prudent approach and being fiscally conservative. And I think you are getting a flavor for where we are at in terms of administration and really wanting to pump the brakes to address, I think, some of the things that Tammy and her team have just laid out this evening. I think it's also important to draw a distinction between a balanced budget and a structurally balanced budget. And it's, my commitment is to deliver the board and our community a structurally balanced budget. So to the point that Director France just brought up, we are in a bit of a tough spot to make some decisions based upon, soft monies. So the board will have to prioritize, what is of value in terms of FTE and personnel in the district that were paid for through federal dollars or that were temporarily moved towards federal funding, and make decisions as that going to now go into our general fund. And I think the point was also made, this is a very important slide. We are a very, very lean district. That when compared to our West Metro colleagues and our Southwest Metro colleagues, we run right at the top of the pack in terms of overall performance. Again, point-in-time measures of MCAs, but just, I would say one of our neighbors to the west of us, northwest of us, is a touch better. But generally speaking, we're a strong number 2, maybe a number 3 in some regards. And literally, I'm just kind of pulling the state spreadsheet. So for the same dollar amount, for less dollar amount, I'm sorry, we are guaranteeing, a top third, kind of ranking in the top 1, 2, or 3 of districts getting those results. Is it sustainable? I think Director Ruel, you asked that. I mean, we're at a point where we're feeling it in our system. There's only so much that we can put on the shoulders of our staff, no matter what the position is. They're all doing more for the same pay. We have to be stewards of public resources, so for-profit corporations can do bonuses and those kind of things. Well, we don't do that in public education, right? So we have to find other ways to incent and attract folks to do this work. And, we don't go in here to become, extremely wealthy and rich. But there's only so much that staff can bear. And so looking at that sheet here, that column, can't see the column, but we can see that overall, no matter which line item you really look at, we are delivering comparable results for fewer dollars per student, and that's something I'm proud about, not something I want to sustain, because I have to be a realist. So structurally balanced budgets are where we stay within our means, and we're not banking on soft monies that will one day run out. And so we're at that point. In a year and a half or so, when all the federal funds are done, in '04, I think is the outset, we're going to have to make some key decisions. And so I think building an infrastructure now so that we can deliver a structurally balanced budget that's not predicated on federal monies is going to be critically important, for me as your superintendent, and I think we owe it to this community to ensure that. So just wanted to add that point to it.
Can I add one other point to just of what Dr. Thomas is saying? I think it's important too, and I'm going to say this as a collective, just with the conversation we've had at the table, and knowing the decisions that we have to make going forward, and seeing And knowing that our administrators here, many of them were not in the seats June 30th, when we were told that we were going to probably end close to 9%. So we go into the year thinking 9%, and now we see, you know, it's 17. For people that have to make decisions, I think, and I know you guys are committed to doing this moving forward, we need to have accurate information in the sense of on a more regular basis so that we can make those, help make those decisions of what, you know, needs to happen, it needs to change. It's too critical of a point right now in our district to fill what we have to fill. And so I think moving forward, knowing I'm not going to be a part of this, but I think saying it for the rest of my directors here, it's critically important that we get information that is as accurate as we can, because we go into a year thinking scarcity. And I'm not saying that we don't have scarcity, because we do. But from a public standpoint, when you see 17% and we were planning on 9, it's a big difference. And so I just think we need to be really clear about where things are at, where we're seeing the savings. If we're not going to be having positions get filled, let's get that information to us on a regular basis so that we can adjust if we need to along the year. So I just ask that as someone who's sat here for a while and, you know, gets critiqued all the time about decisions we make. Information, correct information is really important, so that's it.
Anybody else? All right. I'll just echo what Stacy was saying. I do feel like we are on a trend where we're getting more information and more detailed and more accurate information. And I appreciate that. And from the sound of the experience with the auditor as well, that everything was responsive and quick and timely. So my thanks to the business office for what has been done and for what I anticipate will continue to give us some of that information we need to make tough decisions and forecast better. And thank you to you. You always come forward with what can be very complicated graphs and formulas, and you help everybody, including those who are listening, really get kind of a clear picture of is the district healthy or not, what are the biggest issues we need to attend to, and I want to thank you for the time you put into presenting in a way that we all get a much better sense of what's happening in our district.
Thank you.
Dr. Thomas.
Chair Nelson, I apologize. I think it's also important, we had a finding this evening, and maybe not everybody will go into the big book, but I think it's important for the board and our community to get some context around that finding.
Yeah.
If I could ask Marcus to come forward, I think it's something, again, we owe it to the board and to our community to bring some context and some understanding to that finding before we move into corrective action.
Great, thank you.
Members of the board, Dr. Thomas, good evening. My name is Marcus Malazzo. I'm the Director of Technology for Prior Lake Savage Area Schools. So thank you to Jim and his team for the ECF audit. It was a lot of work. We spent a lot of time emailing and passing information and in the spirit of being transparent, and we provided quite a lot of spreadsheets and inventory. There are a couple items that I will be seeking clarification on. And it's in regarding to the finding of unmet need. We had, there was a finding, per our ECF funding commitment decision letter, we were awarded a reimbursement of $151,296. This reimbursement equals 1 year of a 4-year lease with a 5-year buyout option. The actual cost of the Apple MacBook Airs is about $919 per device. So what I'll be working with our E-rate consultant and USAC, which is the Universal Service Administration Company, is to seek clarification on what that award actually means in regards to our inventory. So if it's a $151,000 award and it equals 1 year of a 4-year lease with a 5th-year buyout option, is that 20% of the inventory or does it cover the entire inventory? So I will be working with our E-rate consultant and USAC on that to get some more clarification around it. The other piece is that during the time of the audit, these MacBook Airs that we started leasing back in 2019, at the time of the audit, they're over 3 years old, which is considered obsolete by this program. And If you look at the FAQs and you start working that, you can see unmet need needs one device per student or per staff member, and it doesn't take into account inventory. But we demonstrated that even though we had some devices in inventory, those devices were deployed at the time of the audit. So again, I'll be seeking clarification and just getting some answers from those sources so that we can work forward to our corrective actions. So
Thank you.
there's others that I'll be working on, but that I think is a good example. So questions for me?
Mary, go ahead.
I got that from a brief overview, so I appreciate the further explanation. I did have one question that I was going to hold off for later, just over email, but, you know, one of the things we've done has been leasing or outright purchasing. When it comes to public institutions, et cetera, what happens if we decide to take this on credit and depreciate it as you know, as a CapEx or something like that? Is that even an option, and how would that reflect in our numbers and also reflect on the finding?
Great question, thank you. For the example I provided, the Apple MacBook Airs, we've been awarded that amount, but we have not received reimbursement. So there is something we can do with our E-rate consultant in USAC called a funding commitment, it is a post-commitment request form. So I'll seek clarification on what that amount actually means in regards to inventory. And then we can file this post-commitment request form saying, if we had 739 MacBook Airs deployed at a time, that leaves 61 in inventory, but then 41 of those were considered duplicates, but which are actually inventory devices that were deployed at the time of the audit. We can adjust that request amount through this form to reduce the amount that we receive from USAC.
Okay. Does that help us to reduce it? Because I don't know if that's an accurate reduction based upon our current status, particularly for deprecated devices.
I will defer, I don't know, so I will have to keep working with our E-rate consultant USAC and determine what our best next steps are.
Okay.
So we do have that option of the post-commitment, and we'll pursue it if that's what they deem is necessary.
What happens with the resale of those older devices too?
Which
That was
devices?
part of the finding too,
Those were the Chromebooks that we deprovisioned
right?
as a district, so that will also be part of the conversation. I'll be working with the E-rate consultant and USAC, is that we as a district decided to go from two device types to one. I did provide the auditors updated numbers in regards to what was e-recycled or sold back to HPE. I have those numbers, because HPE will do an audit. We received 2 quotes for that e-recycling buyback option. HPE was the better option. They do a complete audit, they grade the devices, and then they give us that information back. So I do have updated numbers on that. But I'll work with Bonnie, our E-rate consultant in USAC, and see where that conversation takes us.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you for the extra effort and for helping us understand that
Absolutely.
context. And as he said, an audit is a learning opportunity for us, and you've certainly dug into that part of it, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for being here tonight and for your time. I feel like we need a big transition moment. Our next item up this evening for discussion is the American Education Week. And as you know from the last few years, we have, as a board, tried to arrange to have some sort of treat or something in all of the district buildings, and also to have a presence as board members in those buildings. In the past, I think we used to sort of sit in the break room, but you don't engage with a lot of people when you just sit and wait in the break room. So I believe it was it the last 2 years? We kind of went and we walked the buildings a bit more and got to, take advantage of the opportunities we like to observe what's happening in the classroom, talk to the administrators and that sort of thing. Martha did some research for us, and I do want to let you know that Child Nutrition Services said they can find the capacity to help us do pumpkin bars again this year. They can. Yes. 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 And those are usually quite a hit. And so they will be arranged, they'll be done individually in each building, and then Martha will follow up on us in terms of collections for that. And then I will work with Martha, if it's okay with all of you, we'll set a schedule for who will be in what buildings when, so we know we have coverage and are monitoring how many board members are together on those visits. So any other comments or questions about that before we move on?
I know I always have fun whenever I go out and spend time with teachers and kind of be the, I was gonna say superintendent, that's your job. Be the board member, but still be a kid in the classroom and in the
Yeah.
faculty lounge. That's always fun.
Yep, exactly, yep. I know we saw several teachers here this evening, and just reminding me how good it is to make that contact. Also with the other staff in the building, right? You know, there's just so many staff at the different levels that impact our kids in American education, and I think all of our staff value that they have a direct impact on the outcomes of our students. So if that's comfortable for everybody, Martha and I will coordinate with the schedule to have you fill in, and we will be all set, and our thanks to Child Nutrition Services. That's very helpful. Next up, we have a proclamation about Business and Finance Staff Appreciation Week. And Dr. Thomas, I'll turn it to you first.
Thank you, Chair Nelson. Board Directors, we heard a little bit about this in our last presentation, but we are recognizing Business and Finance Staff Appreciation Week, and I'll ask Ms. Frederickson to come forward and share a few words on behalf of her dynamic team. Or turn on her mic.
Dr. Thomas. The business and finance office staff actually touch all aspects of the district. They support not only the district office, but all the departments, all the schools, all the other districts that we deal with. They work with outside agencies, with vendors. They send reports to outside government agencies. They answer questions from parents in the community. They're responsible for making sure that the district, as you heard tonight, stays in compliance with all of the policies, laws, and regulations that school districts have to abide by. They're some of the most hardworking, professional, and they're always willing to put in the extra effort when timelines are needed. If they have some deadlines, they're always more than happy to help. They're very experienced, very knowledgeable. They're always willing to help out whenever they're asked to. I've only been in Prior Lake Savage area schools for 4 months now, but I'm honored to be working with these staff. They're just great people, and I truly enjoy working with each and every one of them. So I appreciate you honoring them tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for your words. And then Stacy, if you're willing, would you read our proclamation?
Sure. Business and Finance Staff Appreciation Week, November 1st to the 4th. Prior Lake Savage Area Schools recognizes November 1st through the 4th, 2022 as Business and Finance Staff Appreciation Week. This week, we celebrate our thanks and gratitude for these essential staff. Whereas Prior Lake Savage Area Schools has 12 business and finance staff, whereas business and finance staff are responsible for the overall district budget, processing payables and receivables, payroll for all district employees, student nutrition and meals, transportation payments, complete with the annual audit, tracking and reporting enrollment, monitoring contracts, and maintaining accounting codes and fiscal compliance. Whereas business and finance staff provide accurate and transparent financial reports for our Prior Lake Savage area community and taxpayers, such as preliminary finance budgets, property tax levies, audit summaries, and more. Whereas business and finance staff are overseeing the $115 million budget for the fiscal year 2022. Therefore, let it be resolved, the Board of Education hereby extends its appreciation to all Prior Lake Savage area school businesses and finance staff for their fiscal responsibility to our district, which ultimately impacts the success of our students. And we declare November 1st through the 4th, 2022 to be Business, Finance, and Staff Appreciation Week in Prior Lake Savage area schools. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have a proclamation for National School Psychologists Week. Dr. Thomas, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. This evening, we have our Director of Student Support Services, Michelle Chuka, who will come forward and talk a little bit about her interaction supporting our school psychologists. And I think we've all reaped the benefits of that position in our district over the past couple of years. But, you know, they played a critical role, and so I'll have her share a few words.
They do. They are a wee but mighty department. We have 8 school psychologists across our district. That's E12. And they have vast knowledge in child development, mental health, interventions, data. I mean, they help run our problem-solving teams. They help with special education assessment, and they really plug holes wherever we need them to. And because they are so talented and professional, we definitely get a lot out of them. So I want to honor them and thank them for all their work as we celebrate them here in the upcoming week or two here, November 7th. Is that 2 weeks from now? Time flies.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. And Amy, if you're willing to read our proclamation?
Prior Lake Savage Area Schools recognizes November 7th through 11th, 2022 as National School Psychologist Appreciation Week. This week, we celebrate our thanks and gratitude for these essential staff. Whereas during the week of November 7th through 11th, 2022, schools throughout the United States will celebrate National School Psychology Week to highlight the important work school psychologists and other educators do to help all students thrive. Whereas this year's theme is Together We Shine, which is derived from how we see hope after several challenging years. We have all faced difficulties created by the pandemic, social injustice and inequity, economic stress, and challenges to mental and physical health. Reconnecting with others and reestablishing the sense of being valued, parts of a greater whole, empowers students and adults to find purpose and possibility. Therefore, let it be resolved, the Board of Education hereby extends its appreciation to all Prior Lake Savage Area Schools psychologists for helping all students thrive, and declares November 7th through 11th, 2022 to be National School Psychologists Appreciation Week and PLSAS.
Thank you, and thank you to our small but mighty staff, as she claimed. Thank you so much. Next up is Community Education Appreciation Week and National Community Education Day. Dr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair Nelson, Board of Directors. Our Director of Community Education, new Director of Community Education, Mr. Joel Dahl, will come forward to share a few words about the programming there. And I'll say, you know, community education plays an integral role when we talk about E12. That's really where a bulk of the conversation lies. But when you think about serving the entire community, it's really from birth, you know, to passing on. And how we support, you know, our community through every stage of life. And I think Joel really has a vision and a heart for that work, and really excited to have him as part of our team, and he'll share a few words on behalf of his staff.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Good evening, Board Chair Nelson and members of the board. It's my honor and pleasure to be here tonight to speak on behalf of our entire community education and services team as we recognize and celebrate the upcoming Community Education Appreciation Week and National Community Education Day. As you all know, community education covers a wide range of program areas from our youngest of learners in ECFE all the way up to our adult ABE classes and senior programming. Our mission in community education is to enhance the quality of life for all citizens through our lifelong learning opportunities and our community partnerships. This mission doesn't happen without the amazing team that we have here in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools. Everyone from our kids company staff, our preschool teachers, our assistants, office staff, and coordinators, it is truly a team effort. We have an extremely talented and dedicated group of professionals that strive each and every day to provide the highest quality service and programs to our students, parents, and community members. I feel very fortunate to be leading this team and to work alongside each of them in serving our communities. I would also like to recognize the many volunteers and advisory council members who support our programs. Volunteers are the backbone of any strong organization, and we truly appreciate the value that they bring and the time and energy they give to help us deliver these high-quality programs. Finally, I'd like to thank the district staff, administration, and the board for your partnership and your support. We are extremely grateful for your cooperation in allowing us to serve our students and families outside of the regular school day and to open up our facilities to community groups, businesses, and organizations. It is this cooperative spirit that allows us to meet the many changing needs of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Jonathan, would you be willing to read the proclamation this evening?
Certainly. Prior Lake Savage Area Schools recognizes November 7th to the 11th, 2022 as Community Education Appreciation Week. Our district's more than 200 community ed staff, advisory council members, and volunteers provide learning opportunities and resources for our community to develop lifelong skills. This week, we express our gratitude for these community educators. Whereas National Community Education Day will be celebrated on November 10, 2022. Whereas Governor of Minnesota Tim Walz has proclaimed November 10th, 2022 as Community Ed Day in the state of Minnesota. Whereas community education staff and volunteers deliver and support a wide range of educational opportunities for learners of all ages and stages of life, from early childhood, youth programs, and adult education programs, and more. Whereas the members of the Community Education Advisory Councils serve the crucial role of sharing community perspectives to advise the department and the director in the fulfillment of the department mission. And whereas the Board of Education encourages all community members to engage in community education through participating in the wide variety of activities, programs, and services, helping provide new opportunities or serving on an advisory council. Therefore, let it be resolved, the Board of Education hereby extends its appreciation to community education staff, advisory council members, and volunteers for serving our entire community with learning opportunities and resources to develop lifelong skills, and declares November 7th to the 11th, 2022 to be Community Education Appreciation Week in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools.
Thank you again to Community Education, all your staff and volunteers as well. All right, moving on to board governance and policy. First up this evening, we have board policy review. And Dr. Thomas, I'll turn it over since the first one is coming from your admin team.
Thank you, Chair Nelson. Dr. Edwards will come forward. We have a slight date change, revision for this policy.
Yes, if you recall last spring, we went through a review process and overlooked, and we just are bringing it back with a adjustment that we need to bring back in with that September 1 date instead of beginning of school year as was approved at the June meeting.
And that was a MDE requirement, is that
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
Okay. Any comments or questions about that change being made? All right. Thank you very much. Next up, before we present the policies, 213, school board committees, and then as it relates to policy 208, development, adoption, and implementation of policies. Dr. Thomas has asked for an opportunity to talk to the board about some context we might use in considering those policies.
Thank you, Chair Nelson, Board of Directors. Several board meetings ago, we had conversations about looking into the composition and the work being done through a variety of committees in the district. And I made a request to come back and provide some feedback from staff with regards to our ability to deliver outcomes but seek greater efficiency. As well as, you know, a large priority for me as superintendent is to ensure opportunities for our community to be involved at various touch points, particularly around policy. And so through conversations with staff, we feel that there are some opportunities for us to merge some of our committees together and really bring your scope of board governance committees to a narrower but deeper opportunity to engage with community around key areas. And so what we would like to do is come back, you know, with this policy, come back with revisions reflecting the will of our staff and where we have engaged one of our community-based committees right now with, I think, unanimous support from them to merge, finance and operations together. When, I've spoken with Dr. Edwards around the curriculum advisory committee that we have, and even just some of our processes for those committees to engage more deeply with our community. I think we have a recommendation that will be coming from there as well, I think, to give some breadth to the work that the current committee is engaged in. And again, I think our opportunity with our legislative committee and our executive committee, greater efficiencies and merging of some of those visions as well. So the policy that you see before you this evening doesn't have the language, but I wanted to first come back with you as an update to you all to say, I believe we have the consensus and support from the administrative side. And with that update, per the will of the board, we would then come back after the introduction of this policy with our proposed strike-through language.
Okay, so I'll open that up for discussion. What we're looking for is board direction that this is something we'd like to entertain and have them bring back for the official first read, proposed wording, and that by necessity would also impact policy 208 for the implementation of policies. So any comments or questions for Dr. Thomas or for discussion? Mary, go ahead.
Well, I know we talked about this at the FLIRP committee too, to do that, and I think this is a much broader conversation. Given the feedback from staff and given the need for change and for more community involvement and more direction, as well as, I like the idea of deep, because right now we're kind of shallow and all that. I would entertain that we basically take the policy on the committees and the policy on policy and kind of remove those for a more deeper discussion in another study session, given the feedback from the staff, as well as ask members of the board to take a look at it, especially in light of our conversation at FLIRP and other committees, to have a more comprehensive look at this. Is that possible? So, in other
You're
words.
saying pull this out of the cycle right now? Because what he's proposing is to bring the changes back for the first read, and then we'd still have second and third read.
Well, technically, this is the first read, and what I'd like to do is not make this the first read, actually give us more time to have a more deeper discussion at a study session.
This is the intro, this is not the first read.
Right.
Well, it's.
And this is a study session.
I get that.
Yeah, no.
What I'm saying is like, basically give us the time to go, to do a deep dive and delay the whole cycle here with these particular policies so we don't feel rushed to get through. I think it's very important that we do this, that we give the policy and the deep dive that's needed here, because we want to make this a lasting, sustaining change. And putting, a lot of times when we go through this, we have the 200 policies, so we move through them almost, 1, 2, 3, 4, each reading, each review, et cetera. We don't always allow the time for the deep dive, and I'm asking for that time for the deep dive.
I will open it to other comments. I just do want to give you some context. The exec team and Dr. Thomas were asked to draft some of this and to talk about it, so he brought the input from his staff. Stacy and Amy worked on it. Amy in particular spent a long time researching other policies, getting the input from Dr. Thomas from the other staff and beginning to draft it to bring forward. So yes, it does merit discussion, but we would have it brought forward again for a first read and a second read and then a final vote. I just don't want to, I want to balance moving it through, because what we're looking at in January is new committees. And so if we have to name board directors to new committees, if we can get this working to the point we agree to it, we're set in January to move forward and get our stakeholders from the community as well. So I'm just going to pose that for discussion and open it up for the rest of you.
Could I also, Chair Nelson, to respond to Director Francis' inquiry, I appreciate having the conversation around the context of committees, and we were both in that meeting. My only urgency, if I can just be very transparent, we're gonna be launching full budget come January.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure we have a committee in play that, in that regard, that we can hit the go button on with community. And so if we can find ways to engage into that conversation, but I just want you all to know, that's what's driving my urgency, is that
Okay.
we're gonna have, budget season is right around the corner. And I wanna have time to get folks on that committee, merge, and that kind of a thing. And I think some of that work, I would love to have conversations, and we can figure out a structure, so I'm open to that.
Sure.
As well.
Sure.
Well, like you, and like I mentioned a couple weeks ago, previous to the FLRP, I also did quite a bit of research.
Yep.
And I offered to share that, if you wanted to see it.
That'd be great.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Because I agree with you that I'd like to get this started right away. I wasn't suggesting we hold off to do that. I was just suggesting we allot the time, because again, in our, we tend to get into this, let's get through these policies fairly quickly, and there's a couple of them that probably warrant a lot more time, and I'm asking that we take that time.
Can I ask a point of order question?
please.
So on on the first and second and third read, I think if I have it right, we can engage in deep dialogue,
Yes.
Yes.
correct, in those
Yes.
reads? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, we can still have the process, but give us the allotted time to go.
Then the
Okay,
meeting.
I hear you. I'm.
Yep, that's
I-
easy to do.
I
Yeah.
support that.
Okay.
Jonathan, did you have a comment?
I think we're all coming to the same conclusion that we can do both. We can keep it on the schedule, and we can be as deep as we need to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll be cognizant of that too when doing agenda planning. How about?
Got it.
Right. I'm sorry, Julie, did you
Yeah,
want to
no, I
add
agree with
something?
that too. I want to be able to spend time
Yep,
talking it over.
Yes.
Not just, here it is.
exactly.
Don't ask a question.
No, exactly. I'm sorry if it sounded like I was trying to do that. No, that was not my intention.
Just say, ouch, I'm listening.
Good intention.
I just didn't want to have staff jump into all the red line, and then
Yeah.
that wasn't the will of the board to say, go ahead and do that. So now we're gonna go, address some of this and then come back for the deeper presentations and engagement of kind of what we're recommending for you all to consider for your committees.
And if you want to send that information to myself and Amy, or even directly through Amy, just so we don't end up four of us exchanging
No,
it
that's
on
fine.
email, that would be fabulous, and we can pull that into the discussion as well. So thank you for that. All right, I'm going to jump back up. I know 208 will be affected by that, so we can maybe set that aside. Policy 203, Board Operating Norms. The committee is recommending no changes with the exception of item 6.13. There's been kind of a legacy policy we've had that at school board business meetings, we have asked open forum speakers who approach the board to talk about topics not on the agenda, because in the past, I think there had been some history of some emotional discussions or presentations before a big vote. However, we are proposing that we remove that restriction at our business meetings, that any topic would be open to a stakeholder in our community. Thoughts on that?
I totally agree with that. I would like to add one other thing. Because we've had some confusion about the sign up and all that.
Yep.
I've noticed that most city councils and other school board meetings said, you know, basically, we don't see them in the sign up, and then offer for people to come up and speak. Because what the feedback that I've gotten, and the feedback I think we got pretty loud and clear last year, was we didn't know. You know, even though it's out there on the table, a lot of people, there's a lot of, you know, people just passing by, et cetera. And I have observed other boards as well as city council saying, okay, is there anyone else that would like to come up and speak, particularly when we have the time? And we don't do that today. I don't know if that needs to be codified in the policy, but I would like to see that being offered instead of this requirement, nobody signed up, therefore nobody speaks.
Yeah, I guess I would offer another option that's been done in the past, is leaving it up to the discretion of the chair. Whether or not to open it, I think, I think it's important to get public comment. I think, for the most part, when I was chair last year and we had lots of people coming, they were pretty aware of the process. We had people out there greeting most of the time. So I didn't find a lot of confusion from people. But I think it's important, I don't know, I just offer another opinion, just because there's a lot of things going on. There's audio, visual, it's a lot of things for the chair, to give them the 10 minutes or whatever, and to let them be able to talk to people about what they're talking about or whatever. I mean, still even just to have that subject line, I think is important as well. It's still our meeting, to be quite honest. I don't think we've been very restrictive. I've even called on the carpet on a couple times about, oh, the 15 minutes, it's not long enough. It's like people, I think we went over.
We have.
We've been very accommodating. I think for the most part, considering the environment that we've been in for the last 2 years, I think open forum has actually worked quite well. I think it's just this piece here that is confusing for people, and I'm not tied to it. It was legacy before I was ever on the board, so I don't know if it warrants the need for that, but there's always been a line in there about discretion of the chair, whether or not to open it up, and that's even during the meeting too. I mean, so I've done that in the past.
And we would leave study session as is, that it would be at the end of the meeting on a topics, because that's a more relaxed and engaging opportunity. Other thoughts or comments on that?
My thought on it is, I think what you're getting at, Mary, is wanting to make sure we're engaging the community to their satisfaction, and that's always going to be, a challenge, especially for a board when it's our meeting. One way we can remedy that a little bit, and we've talked about this, is with our committee work to engage more community members in that advisory committee capacity, so that as issues arise, going to community members or going to those committee meetings, they can arise there in a less formal setting that invites more dialogue. So I don't want to say I don't want an environment where people feel like they don't get to speak, but if we can offer up more than one option, where they're engaged through their representation on advisory committees or through contacting board members, those are options too.
Well, yeah, and I'll even offer, people are confused sometimes when they come to speak for whatever reason. Like, they don't really understand what it is. I've had conversations with people that it's like as simply as, well, have you talked to this person? And they're able to talk to a finance person, or talk to the superintendent quickly. And it satisfies. They're like, oh, I didn't realize. So I think there's confusion. So I think if anything, the encouragement of having a sign-up sheet, having it have a subject line, having the chair, it doesn't have to be, have discussion or just greet is really, I think, important, because it's relationship.
I will say I do use that time to go out. I make sure I can pronounce the names correctly, that we've agreed on, if the topic was in policy or not, and then how it would work. It is an opportunity to get to know and engage them. And from running the meeting standpoint, I will agree, there's enough things shuffling right here that to have, these are my 3 speakers tonight, and here's what they're speaking on. Not that there might not be an occasion, but I do think I will echo the thought that the committee work is where we're trying to get more meaningful engagement from the committee, and that's why this is a more substantial policy revision when we look at that one. And so that's my experience as chair, is, we greet them, we let them know what the policy is, they can come up, and that gives me that time. That's why you see me at Martha, like, were there any papers? Because I'm going to go out there and visit, so. Other thoughts on this and direction? Yeah.
I would absolutely support striking the part about can't talk about something
Okay.
on the agenda. I'm fine with that. I think I understand why it was there, but it's just our job
Yep.
to not vote
That's
based on
fair.
what somebody says, right? So, I think a compromise, I think when we have a discussion like this, I always am cautious of the what-if monster getting out of the cage, because you can take it in a million different directions, right? To me, the compromise of signing up, keeping the sign-up sheet, having it there, allowing people who maybe didn't know they were supposed to sign up to have an opportunity to speak, would simply be when you introduce when you introduce its public forum time, you call, before you have anybody speak, that you would call out, is there anybody else? I have 3 people who have asked to speak. Is there anybody else who would like to be added to the list? Because what I don't think you want is people responding to
Yeah.
what was said by the first speaker.
What that
I
does-
don't think you want it to be, is anybody else who wants to talk, and then somebody comes up and that could.
No, that does remove,
That
though,
could
the
get ugly.
ability to connect before the meeting has begun. And Martha's usually out front, or another representative, and says, do you plan to speak this evening? Here's how you do it. So everyone who's come through that door has had that introduction. I also am learning that I need to do a better job of discerning who is truly a stakeholder as they come forward to speak, and not just somebody who's representing a business or something else that has come to speak to the board. So that's what that time buys me. Again, I'm sounding contrary. I think it's just because I'm the one sitting in the chair right
Yeah.
now. But
Yeah.
that gives me a sense of, is this someone who belongs here? Can I respect them and use their name correctly? And what is the topic coming? And once that microphone goes on and I get the thumbs up, like, I know what my next minutes look like. So again, but I don't want it to be shutting voices out. But if the opportunity is to get more community voice at the table, what other options do we have as well that we could also play with? So.
I like Jonathan's idea, though, of just saying, hey, is there anybody else reminded, do you want to sign up?
Right.
You know, we have had people put in complaints and not understand or be told to come and speak at the board meeting, they're prepared to and they don't, you know, it's crowded out there, and they don't make it in,
They're not
especially when.
paying
yeah.
attention. Yeah.
Could that
Well,
announcement
but
be
also
made
when we have a ton of people here for a liquor, you know,
Pushing
yeah,
in.
yeah, so
I would-
it alleviates that, but I like, you know, if we announced up front, has anyone not signed up? Something like that, something to remind people.
Well, and I think that's a good idea, Michael, what you just said.
5 minutes before or 10 minutes before the meeting, I would rather make an announcement, because again, that would be my opinion in terms of being settled when I'm at the table and having had the opportunity to
That
connect.
seat's different.
It's different.
It's different.
That is different.
It is different seat.
Well, and I
Yeah,
will say,
so,
well, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I guess that wouldn't necessarily accommodate late arrivers who might be coming off of work or whatever the situation might be, who also would like an opportunity to speak, but they don't, that time is already closed.
Well, I hate to bring up other ideas, but some other districts, again, this is just food for thought as we navigate this, do online signups.
They require you to be
Yeah.
signed up by like noon the day of the meeting, so that cuts all those hours out,
Yep.
right, when you could add.
We did that during our virtual, I
Right.
believe.
Yeah, when we had to read the letters, we could, yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Exactly.
it's worthy of a discussion, which I appreciate everybody's feedback,
Yep.
because we've all sat and experienced it, and I would say this, it is a business meeting, right, first and foremost, and some of the information in here says, as board members, we have to read our packets and come prepared.
Right.
Right, so for a speaker to come, I appreciate that they have to sign up and be prepared, or at least not just be fully reactionary to discussion that's happening, because we don't get to interact. So we don't get to be reactionary, so I appreciate that there might be ways to have them sign up online, have something on the website that says, click here if you want to speak, because, I mean, we can't accommodate someone who decides to show up 20 minutes late and wants to speak. It's just, then that's just an open forum for, and that's a town hall discussion type.
Right.
Well, for study sessions, that's a little different too, because they speak
Speak
at the end.
Correct.
But
But at
at
a
board
business
meetings, yes, I would totally agree, and they wouldn't, and by the way, if they showed up 20 minutes late, they wouldn't get a chance anyways, because the forum happens right in the
If
beginning.
they show up 14
Yeah.
minutes late, then they could be like, oh, I want to go too, because we allow 15.
Yeah,
I'm just curious.
fine with a
It's good
hard,
conversation.
it's, the meeting starts, you haven't, even if we do add an announcement, if anybody else wants that, fill out a thing, but I get it, from the chair's perspective, you want to know what's happening.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah,
I mean,
I appreciate that, but I do think we have a firm, if we don't know you're speaking when it's time to start open forum,
Well, they
Sorry.
could come back in 2 weeks.
they sure
Yeah.
can.
And there are other ways to reach the board as
You know, I would
well.
just say, come back in a couple weeks.
And we've often done follow-ups after meetings with people who maybe didn't even feel brave enough at that moment to speak, and then they said, I wish I would have, and I said, well, let's set a time.
I mean, and I think from anything that we've seen over the last couple of years of a lot of the boards around us, our open forum and it has really
It worked
worked quite well.
very well.
A lot of people had to change things and do things, and
Yep.
for the most part, we haven't, and we've been consistent, and the community knows. I mean, the people that come and speak know.
Yep.
The
So-
community's been very respectful.
Yes, I would say that, and I think it's because we've had consistency and we're
Right.
respectful and people.
Yeah, you can't keep changing the rules.
No, I think this is just one piece where there's been feedback, and it doesn't need to be there,
Right.
what's on the agenda.
At least we
thing.
could start with this as the first change, right? Like, we're not going to require the topic is open.
Yeah.
The topic is open, as long as it's respectful and follows all those other things we
Yeah.
read before a meeting, no data privacy, all of that, the topic is open.
I also actually thinking just from a pragmatic standpoint and being an incremental change, that change by itself, we might possibly see more people coming wanting to speak and more people signing up because they know they get to speak on something we're talking about that night. And, you know, maybe as a first step.
We start there.
We start there, and in
Yeah, it's
time,
received.
if we feel that that's working fine and it's easy and we want to make some other changes, fine. But I also like limiting, being somewhat narrow with what's in policy and also always including the discretion of the chair. Right? And that gives us an opportunity, if the chair's comfortable with doing something a little bit different, chair's discretion.
Well, I know that we got really positive feedback from the community when we finally agreed to actually have the forum part of the meeting, so it was recorded and people at home could see it. That helped. So if we're good with making this one other incremental change and see where it goes, I'm fine with that. But, you know, we did get some negative feedback from people not knowing and the busyness and stuff like that. And I just don't want to, you know, if we can make sure that people don't feel left out in any way, shape, or form, that we're very clear, then that may alleviate it.
And as silly as it might be, maybe we have an art class make us a really big sign that says, "Sign up to speak here," out there, that gets hung, right? So people
Yeah.
can't say they didn't know.
Always about signs.
All right, any follow-up on that, or are we good bringing that forward for the first read?
Rotary thing.
All good?
Very good.
Okay,
203 for the most part,
signs.
except for that is.
is staying as is, right.
With that change.
208, then, I believe we will hold until we see how it's impacted by the 213, okay? 201.1, school board vacancies. And I just, Martha helped me confirm that MSBA has put out in August of 2022, how to handle school board resignations with really clear steps and guidelines, because not everything's in statute, so there's certain things that we would have to make decisions on. And I do have that document that I could share with you. So at this point, our policy seems correct as is, based on that information. And if you would want, I can also share this article that comes out. It's very helpful. It'll say if you resigned on this day and there's this many days left, but it's an election year, it's, you know, it's just sort of that trail, so. Any other comments on 201.1 this evening? Okay, policy 204, school board member violation of policy. We did not propose at this point any changes. This went pretty far in depth. I believe it was just last year, was it?
2020.
Before that, yeah.
Year before?
Yeah.
Yep. So we had a separate committee work on that, unless there's any further changes or discussion proposed. Okay. Policy 205, open meetings and closed meetings, and I did double check with both Emily and Martha to make sure we were still within all of the legal requirements here and the spell out of what helps us determine if we need to have an open or a closed meeting. Any comments or questions on that? All right, and then we have school board use of electronic communications, and we are not proposing any changes at this point. Any comments or questions on that? All right, so those will all come forward. Now we have an official first read, and these are reviewing what we addressed at the last meeting for introduction of policy. 201 was the legal status of the board, which had no proposed changes to it, I believe. Do you want me to go through these one by one to see if there's additional comments? I think we have follow-up on a couple that I would, so maybe I will just decide to do that. Policy 202, school board officers and membership. We had some question about sharing roles between clerk and treasurer, et cetera, which Martha clarified that we are not allowed to do. Any other comments or questions on 202 right now? Okay. 202.1, student representative on the school board. We did do some follow-up, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Thomas to report out.
Thank you, Chair Nelson. Board of Directors, last week, we had a conversation around the student rep, and should that be structured as a sole representative, or would they cycle it out? And we made the commitment to engage with the student council exec team. So Chair Nelson and I joined them, was it last week?
I think
Was it
so,
last-
early
Last
morning.
week, bright and early in the morning, and they had really good discussion. And I would say, as a team, they want to make sure that as a student council, and then particularly at the high school level, they have a lot of different subgroups of the council. They want to make sure that they have an audience to engage with the board. And I think we were able to clarify, not to speak for them, but what I heard that day is, if they were able to bring up various people up here, they would be able to have conversation with the board. And so we were very clear, the board business meeting is the formal business of the board. That's not going to be a dialogue or a conversational opportunity with the board. And, you know, I had proposed to them, if that's what you're looking for, then perhaps we actually look at ways that we can write our obligation as a board to participate and come to your meetings to have that dialogue. And we also have to verify a couple of other things. So, for example, the student council rep on the board actually gets a scholarship through the state of Minnesota. And we don't believe that the rotation each week, it would have to be the same student based upon how some of that language is written. So we're going to verify that. And one of the conversations that we were having with them was, you know, it takes a couple of months for that student to perhaps feel comfortable enough to start finding their voice and speak at an adult meeting, just in time for them to turn that over to a new person who's going to take another couple of months to develop their voice on the board. And so, again, we just had a very open dialogue, but my takeaway is our student groups want agency of their voice with the board, which is beautiful to hear them articulate that. And so I think the idea that we would explore is how a board rep would actually attend their student council meeting to have that dialogue with the board, so that, and some of the other affinity groups at the high school level that have student agency as well. So that's what we have not landed on a decision. I know they were talking, going to be exploring that, I think, with a broader council. Yep. So more to come as an update for you all with regards to where they land in terms of their final decision.
Yeah. And their advisor, Mr. Ingalls, will be working closely
Yep.
with them as well and helping them navigate that. So it was sort of like the intention of having a student rep was sort of long-term as set up by, you know, MSBA and opportunity to win a scholarship. And on their end, you know, to sort of not be a resume builder, but it kind of is. It's learning to show up at that board meeting. But the larger issue of having student voice, once we talked about how restrictive a business meeting is versus a dialogue, they were very, I mean, they hung after and they were late, you know, going to their first period class because they were like, yeah, we've never had that, we've never had that, we would love that. So something to explore. Again, we'll probably bring forward, once we've retouched base with them, any other proposals for that policy, but as it stands, we're working through it.
Yeah, one last thing, too. So before we had the conversation, we didn't want to bias the conversation, so we asked, what is your perception of how this policy is written in terms of representation? And the perception is that there would be a board, student council rep there, you know, that would be there for the year. But through conversation, that's when they began exploring some alternatives. So my recommendation is, if the student council decides that they want to have some kind of rotation, that we would do that in the next calendar year, so that the current board rep doesn't feel as though the rug was kind of pulled out, you know, midstream and we changed, you know, kind of. So that would be one ask that I would bring back if that's where they land. You know, if you all are comfortable with that, like, let's make that change effective in the new year versus midway through the year. So,
And they also pointed out that each officer in student council has different roles, and this one
Yes.
is specifically assigned to president.
Yeah.
But they weren't opposed to exploring ideas either, but that is traditionally one of the roles, so.
for the past 14 years.
So can I summarize? We're going to leave this policy here the same, but we're going to change the review from every 2 years to maybe review it next year for the next board school year so that we can do this, or are we adding something to it for a committee, for a board
I think we're
rep?
waiting for follow-up with student council and Mr. Ingalls.
Okay.
Because they were gonna take time without us in the room to have some more in-depth discussion with more members than were
Oh, okay.
represented there.
Okay.
So if you're comfortable with that?
The other thing, and we haven't discussed this, but when we're working on the committee policy, you know, we have all our representation in there for other boards that we, you know, like
Yeah.
Schools for Equity and Education, and then the internal, like ECFE reps
Right.
that we have, that we could add. We could add a student council
Right.
board rep to
I was
that
thinking that
list,
as
and it would be
yeah.
captured there, is my
I
point.
think, yeah, if they're, yeah, whatever they come back with, if we're good with it and it doesn't, like you said, violate the business of the board or do anything like that, or make it confusing for the scholarship, then yeah, I think that's great. I'm really happy that that conversation took place.
Yeah, it was great.
Engaging.
Really engaging.
Makes you want to spend a lot more time over there listening. It really does. So, all right, well, thank you for your discussion on that. Next up is 209 Code of Ethics. Again, the only thing we had proposed in there was the MSBA language under purpose. Any other follow-up to that? All right, 210,
I would just let everyone read it for a second, just to make sure.
go ahead.
No, anybody have any comments on that? Because we spent
Oh, I'm sorry.
a little time on that.
Yeah, so we discussed it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you guys were gone. So I'm sorry, are there more comments on the Code of Ethics?
The only thing that changed was the underlined, right?
Yep.
The
Correct.
qualification of the.
It's just a add.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
We have nothing up front, but I guess if we do, we can always send in something over email, right? I didn't have a problem with it when I read it the first time.
No.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. 210 was conflict of interest, and we did have, as you recall, a few strikeouts to change either numbers that were changed at the state level or to have more accurate wording throughout. Any other discussion you want to bring forward at this point, at this first read of it? No jumps to the microphone? We're good to move forward? Okay. 211, criminal or civil action against the school district, school board members. And I don't believe we had any proposed changes to those. There was no, I don't know that there was any discussion last time, any this time? Okay. 212, school board development and evaluation. At our last meeting, I did make a note, I think it was Jonathan who proposed that we, when we talk about school board development and also bringing in new school board members, that we be a little more prepared in providing resources, including a list of acronyms most frequently used.
Flashcards.
To save them some time getting up to speed at new, yeah, I think that's a very wise thing, and several districts do that, so. Other comments on policy 212? All right, and then we had policy 214, out-of-state travel by board members, and there were no proposed changes to that policy. We're still good with that? All right, and then finally, we have a second reading of policy tonight, policy 535. I know Director of Student Services is still here. If you'd like to step forward. We will, if we are good to go with this policy, we will be bringing it forward at the November 14th board meeting for approval. Is there anything you'd like to add to the discussion for this?
No,
Just-
I did add in the form to fill out, like who could be a handler, trying to, you know, assure families that they could choose anyone.
Great.
But the policy itself remains unchanged.
Good, and we did have some discussion last time on this. Is there more comments or questions?
No, I just know that there's a lot more kids out there that have service animals, particularly dogs. Haven't really seen anyone, although I've heard of it, of the mini horses. And I know one of the biggest things they do is they go and they search the districts of who allows it and the feeling that they get. And I know last year or the year before, there was a comment, and of course we discussed it as Southwest Metro. And, you know, as they're choosing a school district for their child, you know, the first thing they say is, hey, I work all day, I can't be there to help let that dog out. Who, you know, is, you know, and then they're not, I think that we underestimate or overestimate, I think is the best word, people's willingness to call in when they see something in writing. I think that what they prefer to do is call up a friend of theirs that's in the district, talk to their neighbor, you know, something like that. So, you know, when we are doing these policies that are so emotional, that the idea of welcoming, the idea of making this as soft as we can, particularly in the form, and letting people know, hey, we're here to help you somewhere in there. Please, if you have any questions or if you need this, call this number, email this, make it really obvious. Don't make them call the district and get jumped around. That actually encourages them to want to come here, particularly when their child has a service animal. And I think, you know, there was a comment made at the last one that people don't really go into these policies, read it. That's not true, because if you go to the district website and you search, the first thing that comes up is the policy, and that's the only thing they see. So, you know, to just keep that in mind as we're writing these things. I think we are a very caring district, and I don't doubt that once they call in. But I certainly wouldn't want a student or family to be eliminated or not consider us and go to another school district that's close by because they didn't just get a warm and fuzzy on their initial interaction online.
Yeah. And another thing, you know, once we have a policy that we've adopted on this, I will share it out with the special education licensed staff too. So as they work with students and families, and that they hear if a student does have a service animal, that they can make those families aware that service animals are allowable. And then also I'll share it with our SEEK, our Special Ed Advisory Council too. And we'll try to get the word out that we do have a policy and that we do, you know, want to include service animals, should that be what a student needs.
Yeah. You know, one of the other things that got brought up, and this actually got brought up in a conversation with a parent at a bar, but where they said, you know, I know you guys are having a hard time finding food service and stuff like that, but can you imagine how many stay-at-home parents or moms or older siblings would love to volunteer at the school and get involved if they knew that their job was to walk a dog for a kid? And I went, wow, I think you're right. So that's just a feedback.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right.
Thank you.
That will come forward for a vote then. Thank you very much. Next, we're at Superintendent Relations.
Can I make a
Oh, I'm
comment, though?
sorry, Mary.
We were going to bring up policy
Yes.
508.
Yes.
And I know it's not
The
included
bullying
here.
policy?
The bullying policy,
mhm.
yes.
506, right.
506, sorry. And 506.1, I believe, is the
Yep.
specific
Yep.
bullying policy. When can we get that on the calendar and actually go over that a little bit more in depth?
Great. We did look into that, and then I'll turn it to Dr. Thomas as well. In the June board meeting, what was discussed was not necessarily doing it before the 200s, but that we did need to revisit it for two things: to follow up on jurisdictional language and interpretive language in there, and that the steps to be taken were to, I think, verify with legal if we needed to make any adjustments. And that's being looked at right now, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Thomas. Thank you for reminding me.
Yes, thank you for bringing that forward, and, excuse me. We do have, we spoke actually with attorneys this evening, or this afternoon, and they assured us that they would have their interpretation before the next board business meeting. We have the 506, but we don't have the .1. So that's what we're waiting for, is that .1 jurisdictional language that I think will, kind of reads gray, and then given some of the challenges that we've had in the past and what we know will come in the future at some point, we want to make sure that we're crystal clear on that. And so we got that assurance later on this afternoon. So that, once we have that, staff will review, and then we'll request to come forward in a work study session with the board.
Great.
But we should have it well before the first of the year.
Great. thank you. Other comments or questions about that one? Okay, thanks for reminding me, Mary. I had notes, but it was on the back of my agenda here, so I appreciate that. Okay, now I will turn it to superintendent relations.
And we moved that up earlier, so I'm good.
You're good to go. Okay. Informational items, future events as follows. Please remember the Board Scholar Recognition event at the high school tomorrow at, from 11 to 1:30 in the Commons for those who can attend, to recognize our board scholars who will come to our,
I don't mean to interrupt you, but we had something else in the board book with the additional staffing for certified staff. Is that something we need to discuss?
that's at the open, when we open the meeting.
That's when we
Further
go
down.
over.
There it is.
Yep. Thank you. We have to do an official meeting for
I wasn't
that.
sure if we wanted to discuss that beforehand. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I
No, that's
apologize.
fine. We have to do that in an actual, we'll have to open an official meeting for that. Thank you, though. Yeah, so tomorrow, for those who are able to come, from 11 to 1:30 at the high school to recognize students. Also, I think last Listen and Learn with the Superintendent will be October 27th at Shepherd of the Lake at 6 PM. So looking forward to hopefully having a good turnout for that last one. There are no submissions tonight for public forum. So at this time, I am going to adjourn our study session, and we'll be transitioning to an open meeting. And before I call that meeting to order, is everybody okay if we just plow through? Keep going without a break? Okay. Fabulous. So now I have to call that back to order. Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
With liberty and justice for all.
Roll call this evening. All board directors are present. We have a short agenda, but could I have a motion to approve the agenda as listed in your board packet?
So made.
By Stacy, second by Enrique's deepening voice over there. Thank you very much. Okay, first up, we have an acknowledgement for receipt of the 2021-22 audit report. And do we need to officially vote on that, Martha? To receive, and do I have to roll call that or not? Okay, do I have a motion to officially acknowledge the receipt of the 2021-22 audit report?
So made.
By Jonathan, do I have a second?
Second.
Julie, okay. Comments or questions on that?
I'll just make a comment. This was presented at the study session earlier. There were numerous questions, so if you're looking for information and questions about all this, I'd refer to the tape of this evening's study session.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, all those in favor of acknowledging the receipt of the audit, say aye. Aye, opposed? That carries this evening 7-0, thank you. Next up is approval of additional 2022-23 staffing. Dr. Thomas, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Chair Nelson and Board of Directors. Tonight, we'll have Ms. Herman walk through some stipend information for our Dean of Student positions.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas, members of the board. We're bringing this forward to you today, coming back full in person for the first time in a couple years, needing to restore our dean positions to support the student needs currently, back to the levels that we saw previous when we were fully in person, to provide the strategic directions for student achievement and also the safe, secure, and supportive environment, dealing with the additional student behavior and social emotional needs that they're presenting this year. So we are bringing forth a recommendation to add a stipend for the additional duty days that are required to fulfill these roles.
And before I open it to comment questions, I'm going to start with one. Emily knows I reached out to her beforehand, just for our clarity and for the clarity of those who might be listening. I just asked, I was trying to remember why we use stipends versus just a salary adjustment, and if you would just readdress it, I know you briefly did there, but it had to do with extra days. We needed them in the past, and then COVID came and we didn't need them That,
Yep, so in the past, they had additional duty days outside of the regular teacher contract days that were reduced over the last 2 years that we, based off analysis and the student needs that we have this year, we are recommending bringing that back and provide that compensation that is supporting that additional need.
so that's in addition to the contract, that goes after those contract dates. Thank you for that clarification. Other comments or questions?
Is this,
Oh, Stacy,
well,
sorry.
this is specifically the additional days that we have in the summer, or?
That's additional days throughout the school year, additional meetings in addition to the additional days in the school year and on non-student contact days, additional meetings throughout the year.
Okay, I thought there was a time as to which we brought them back early, or for longer.
That is part of it, correct.
Okay.
Summer days and days throughout the school year.
Okay.
Thank you. Mary?
No, I'm totally in agreement with this. When we cut those days, it was concerning, and I'm glad we're bringing them back.
Okay.
They're needed.
Other comments or questions? All right, board approval is needed. Do I have, did I already get a motion? I don't think I did. Could I have a motion to approve the additional 2022-23 certified staffing?
So made.
By Mary, do I have a second?
Second.
By Enrique. Any additional comments or questions? All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That carries 7-0. At this point, I would take a motion to adjourn the business portion of the meeting. We will be transitioning to closed meeting. This meeting will be closed in accordance with the open meeting law, Minnesota Statute 13D.03, for the purpose of discussing negotiation strategy.
So made.
All right.
Second.
Stacy by Amy, all in favor to adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries 7-0.